Let me just do slideshow from beginning. Okay, this is Walt Whitman, Song of Myself. And I would say what I think I said when I wrote to you. I think this is the greatest of all American poems. What makes it so great is they're just long. I mean, Emily Dickinson never wrote a poem longer than 20 lines. And this is, 50, 60 pages. So it's very long, and that allows for a kind of breadth and depth that is perhaps not possible in Dickinson, who's another great American poet, or much of the shorter poetry of William Carlos Williams, which we'll do next time. He did write one very long poem called Patterson, which is a mixed bag, and a fairly long poem called Asphodel, That Greeny Flower, which is an extraordinary poem. So this is, in a sense, the great American poem. There's much argument about whether there's a great American novel. This is the great American poem. And it's much too long for us to go through the whole of it. So we're just going to do some excerpts that I've selected out, not so much to give you a flavor of it, which it will do, but to show you really what he has to say. Now he says in the poem, and we'll read this, he says, near the end, he says, "Sit a while, wayfarer, here are biscuits to eat, and here is milk to drink." Just blows me away every time I read it. Every time I think about it. A poet offering us milk and cookies like we're in kindergarten, being nurturant and helpful. And I think that attitude of Whitman towards the reader, that kindliness and generosity and warmth communicates throughout the poem. He'll also tell us, and we'll do this section as well. I think this is the key to lyric poetry, that people say things that they wouldn't normally say. I think the questions that we have, the thoughts we have about love and about death and about suffering and about how beautiful the sunrise is, those things, it's very hard to talk about them sometimes. And I think what lyric poetry does is say things in confidence. This is how I tell things in confidence. I may not tell everybody, but I will tell you. I think that is what lyric poetry is about. And even though this is a long poem, and I could go on about, which I won't, about how it's an epic poem, it's also a lyric poem in which he tells things that he wouldn't tell other people. And this is from the preface, to Leaves of Grass, which I'll talk about in a moment. He says in the preface, he says, "The old red blood and stainless gentility of great poets will be proved by their," surprising word, "unconstraint. A heroic person walks at his ease through and out of that custom or precedent or authority that suits him not." I think that's the byword of Whitman. He's going to write about things that other people won't write about in ways that other people won't write. So we'll and I don't ask you to accept that on faith. We'll get to that shortly. Whitman wrote more or less one book of poems in his life called Leaves of Grass. He wrote a book of Civil War poems called Drum Taps, but he just shoved it into Leaves of Grass. So Leaves of Grass was a small volume and grew larger and larger and larger. He kept adding new poems, reshuffling the poems that are in different places. And this was the first edition. As you can see, it was published in 1855, second edition 1856, third edition in 1860. Most of his great poems had been written by the time he finished the 1860 edition. And this is the most stunning book ever published in America. If you look at this cover page, which we will return to several times in the course of the next hour, you'll see a couple of things that are astonishing. Most astonishing is there's no name on the title page. It doesn't say Leaves of Grass by Walter Whitman. So if you walked into a bookstore in New York and picked up this book, wasn't printed very much and it didn't sell very well. The remaining copies are terribly valuable. If you didn't know who wrote it until you got There was a long preface, which I'll show you the first page of it, endless amount of prose, just hard to get through. And then there was a poem that had no title. It later became Song of Myself, had no title. And if you read and read and read and read, you got to the exact middle of that poem, he finally says Walt Whitman and names himself. So there's no name on the title. And then look at this portrait here. I have something, he says, I think it's partly a reflection back on the portrait, which is called the Carpenter's portrait. Apart from the pulling and hauling stands what I am, stands amused, complacent, compassionating, idle, unitary, looks down, is erect, or bends an arm on an impalpable certain rest, looking with side-curved head, curious what will come next, both in and out of the game, and watching and wondering at it. So let me go back to there is an arm and an impalpable certain rest. And there are things about the portrait that are very, very shocking. First of all, he's at ease and in an informal pose with this arm out like this. And he's wearing not a suit and tie, which they tend to do in the 19th century. He's wearing, it's called the Carpenter's portrait because he's wearing a carpenter's shirt. He's wearing a working man's shirt. So he's identifying himself as just a guy writing poetry, which is a highfalutin art form. And he's wearing his hat. He'll say in a line we'll encounter, I wear my hat as I please indoors or out. When I went to grade school, there was a monitor at the door who made everybody take their hats off because you didn't enter a school with your hat on. And that is our tradition. You don't wear hats unless you are Jewish or Islamic. And then you do wear hats in the presence of the Lord. But so this guy sort of at ease, wearing working man's clothes, wearing this strange hat, that's what we have of Walt Whitman. And if we turn the page, we get this, 11 pages of that. That's what's called the preface. And as you can see, there are an awful lot of sentences shoved together and not many paragraphs. And I'll quote a little bit from the preface. And then you finally come to the first, in the book, there were 11 poems. The first poem, it just has leaves of grass at the top, and it has no numbered sections. You'll notice we'll be reading numbered sections. That came later. And he, oh, surprise, surprise, he decided to break it into 52 sections, like 52 weeks of the year. It's like a cycle. And section 1 is these first 5 lines. He'll add more to it as we go on, and we'll look at those. I celebrate myself and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the spear of summer grass. As I worked on this presentation, as I went through it, I realized the whole of the poem is in these opening lines. Shouldn't be surprised, he's a great poet, right? There's the sense of self, I celebrate myself. So there's the assertion of self, and more than just assertion, there is a celebration of self. The whole poem is a celebration of existence. And then equally important is what appears in the next 2 lines. There's a kind of democratic sense that what I assume, you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. This is not a poet who lives on top of Parnassus, the mountain of poets. This is a poet who is speaking for all of us. And he'll say in the section 24 we'll get to, by God, I will have nothing which all cannot be part of and on the same terms. And then he says, this is all of section 1 in the first version, I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the spear of summer grass. You'll pardon me if I'll refer to my father, but my father always used to tell me, don't be a loafer, right? And that is the great American virtue, that we work hard. And here he is just kind of lying around, which is not an attitude we associate with seriousness loafing, and certainly not a stance we associate with poetry. And he's loafing at his ease. So he's kind of, as I say, loafing. He's going against all our sense, our inborn American Protestant sense that you have to work hard and earn the kingdom of heaven, not for Whitman. And he also says in this passage, if you look at it carefully, he loafs and invites his soul. Souls are things we talk about in churches and synagogues and mosques. These are not things we treat lightly and just loaf around talking about. So there's a kind of a lack of seriousness. He's very serious, but there's a posture of lack of seriousness that is, I think, pretty astonishing. And he's writing in an American vernacular, that is the language of American people, which is going to be very important for everybody who follows him. And he's writing free verse. Now, when I was in graduate school, we learned that, oh, well, the first people who wrote free verse were such and such. And this is the guy. This is the guy in English who decided that he would write in free verse. That is, no end-stopped rhyming lines, no set meter. The form of the words would be the form of what he had to say. And I want you to, you can see that. You don't have to be real smart. You're all smart, but you have to be smart to see I celebrate myself is not as long a line as I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the sphere of summer grass. Doesn't have the same number of syllables, doesn't have the same metrical scansion, doesn't have the same weight. So he's doing that, and he'll do that throughout the poem, and it's one of the stunning things about the poem. Now, I don't want you to think that just because he doesn't rhyme at the ends of lines, and because he doesn't have a set meter, that he doesn't rhyme rhythmically, or that he doesn't use a lot of rhyme itself. I, as those of you who took the last course know, I like to color things I, my, my. Boy, that's a lot of rhymes on that sound. And sell, right? Celebrate myself. So I celebrate myself. Woo! That's a lot of cells and my's. And that cell comes up again in us, assume, the S sound. And then he continues throughout all of this. Assume is an identical rhyme with assume, and what I assume, you shall assume. Belonging to me is good. Belongs to you too, right? You assume. Loaf and loaf and. So there's a lot of rhyming going on here, but it is within the lines and not at the end of lines. So this is a poet who's extraordinarily skilled. I don't think he practiced it. Nobody quite knows how it happened. He was a child of Long Island. He was a newspaper reporter in Brooklyn. Then he went to New Orleans and became a newspaper editor. He came back to Brooklyn, was a newspaper reporter, and he had, I think, something of a midlife crisis. And at 36 or 37, you'll talk about that in the next line, he dropped out of the work market and wandered the beaches of Long Island with a little notebook and wrote lines in it. And then those lines ultimately built up into poems. Nobody had ever done anything like he was doing here before. And then he publishes this book called Leaves of Grass. I already told you hardly anybody read it. Emerson got a copy, and it's very Emersonian in its tone. So he wrote him a letter and said, I greet you at the beginning of a great career. And lo and behold, Whitman took Emerson's letter and didn't ask him about it, plastered it over the front cover of his second edition of Leaves of Grass. And Thoreau, who was a pretty smart man, went to visit Whitman in Brooklyn and sat in the attic room that Whitman shared with his mentally defective brother, and they chatted for an hour. So those two people understood that this is a brave, wonderful new voice, but most people didn't. So you can see how he's changed a little. He said, I celebrate myself and sing myself. And for those of you who are aware of the Western tradition, singing is how epics start, right? Of arms and the man I sing, said Virgil, or I sing the wrath of Peleus on Achilles, is how the Iliad begins. So I celebrate myself and sing myself. And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the spear of summer grass. And now these are additions, but I think they're very important. They indicate how profoundly American he is. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here, of parents born here, from their parents, from parents the same and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health, begin hoping to cease not till death. And then he has a little bit more to go. He says, creeds and schools in abeyance. I'm going to take all the systems of belief and all the ways of thinking. I'm going to put them aside in abeyance. I'm not going to forget them, but they're not going to be foregrounded in what I write. Retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor, for good or bad, I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check, with original energy. Whitman is saying in his introduction here what the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche would say late in the century, that is beyond good and evil. I harbor for good or bad. I'm going to say what needs to be said regardless of your categories. And it's going to come out with the energy that is within me without check. I'm not going to say, don't say that. It might be too this or that. And we'll see later on in section 24, he says he doesn't press his finger against his mouth. So here's this early version of Leaves of Grass. And that brings us to section 5. There are a couple of other sections in there. Listen, all of this is really great stuff. I mean, I love all the sections of sung myself, but section 5 is, to my mind, the single most important section in the poem. In section 5, he says, I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. Talking about a poet who is not going to be constrained and is going to walk outside of custom. I mean, he says that other is the body. He believes in the body just as much as the soul. And if he's one thing that comes down to us more than anything is he's a great poet of the body, that the body is as important as the soul, and perhaps the body is the only route by which we can know our soul. And again, that word from the beginning, loaf with me on the grass, loose the stop from your throat. That's a term for music. Organs have stops. Let the sound come out from your throat. Remember, he says, I will let nature speak with the original energy. Loose the stop from your throat, not words, not music or rhyme and want, not custom or lecture, not even the best, only the lull I like, the hum of your velvet voice. It's such a beautiful line. lull I like, the hum of your velvet voice. And what he says, I just want to hear the elemental sounds of existence, whether that velvet voice is of the breath, or whether it's the heart which has its valves and is beating within him. And now he's going to give us a memory. When he says, I mind, it means I remember. And this is a very, very strange passage. I read this 100 times, and it's 200 times. It's a very strange passage. I remember how once we lay such a transparent summer morning, how you settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me and parted the shirt from my bosom bone and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart, and reached till you felt my beard, and reached till you held my feet. Let's start with the last line. He's fully encompassed from head to toes, right? And reached till you felt my beard, and reached till you held my feet. And there's this transparent summer morning, which you have in line 1. And then there are these 3 strange lines. The head is on his hips, and he gently turned over upon me and parted the shirt from my bosom bone. So he's penetrated to the heart by the tongue of the other. This is the interpenetration of body and soul, but it's also a coded portrait of 2 lovers who one turns over on the other, and there is this, I think, sexual act of not only being penetrated deeply, but I think it's a kind of, if you'll pardon my being so explicit, a kind of oral sex. And parted the shirt from my bosom bone and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart. And the reason I think it's oral sex is the head is athwart the hips and turns over. I don't think he's kissing. I think there's something else going on. And the result of this interpenetration of body and soul, right? I believe in you, my soul, the other I am must not be abased to you. A body and soul and lover, which I think is the imagery of this passage. And this coming together of things culminates in love. He will say, swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and knowledge that pass all the argument of the earth. And I know that the hand of God is the promise of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own. And that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers. And I've emphasized these lines. And that a kelson of the creation is love, and limitless are leaves, stiff or drooping in the fields, and brown ants in the little wells beneath them, and mossy scabs of the worm fence, heaped stones, elder, mullein, and pokeweed. So I'm going to talk about kelson here and about these 3 images right here. This is what a kelson is. I had to look it up. A kelson is the timber in a boat to which the keel is affixed, and also the sides. And there's a drawing of a kelson, and there is a wooden model of a kelson. And what he's saying when he says a kelson of the creation is love, he's saying in his metaphorical fashion that what keeps everything afloat is love, right? So we get, and these are the images you'll use at the end. These are elders, and that's mullein, which you have all seen grows in Vermont, has fuzzy leaves, and that's pokeweed, grows more to the south of us, and there's pokeweed berries. So he says, and he's had this experience of interpenetration of body and soul, and maybe man and lover, and maybe self and the world. And he realizes that what keeps it all afloat is love. Everywhere is love. All the leaves that are stiff or drooping in the fields, however limitless there is, love undergirds them, and brown ants and the little wells, even the smallest things, love it supports them also. And mossy scabs of the worm fence, heaped stones, elder, mullein, and pokeweed. And I focused on elder, mullein, and pokeweed, one of my favorite lines in the poem, because I think these are plants that grow as areas that have been cleared for meadows revert back to the wild. That is, everything grows and grows more creative, and more things grow even on the edges and the margins of things. Love drives things forward. So that brings us from section 5, which we just read, to section 6. And this is, if section 5 was heartfelt and deep, section 6 is, I think, astonishing, but it's rhetorical. A child said, "What is the grass fetching to me with full hands?" How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. Baloney. He knows what it is. It's going to speak to him. There's the grass. There's more grass. And he's going to give us a bunch of guesses. It's going to, I guess it is, I guess it is. And the guesses are that the grass is hopeful because it's green, and it's the Lord's remembrancer. You don't have to pay much attention here because we'll go through them all. It itself is tiny, so it itself is a child. It's a uniform picture writing because it grows everywhere on top of graves and says we're all equal. And then he says, it grows out of graves. It's like, we'll just go up to that, it's like hair on top of graves. And then he says, the graves come out of the mouths of people who are dead. It's like tongues. And he says these are all hints as to what it is, what is hopeful and a message from God and picture writing, and what does it tell us? And that's what section 6 will do. So let's look at this. It's a wonderful poem by itself, even though it fits beautifully into the longer poem. A child said, "What is the grass fetching to me with full hands?" How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. That's baloney. He does know, and he's going to tell us. And he's going to make a bunch of guesses, which are going to cohere, as I just suggested, into the unbelievably wonderful, dramatic, and I'm not sure I believe it, ending of this section. I guess the grass must be the flag of my disposition, out of hopeful green stuff woven, right? So grass is the cover of hopefulness, the color of hopefulness. And the next stanza turns on a pun. Handkerchiefs in the 19th century were made out of linen, and another name for linen was lawn. So when we talk about lawn handkerchiefs, not meaning lawns in our front yards, but linen handkerchiefs. And so the grass forms both a lawn, and it's like a handkerchief made out of linen, and it's all over the place, and we wonder, where did it come from, right? Or I guess it is the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrancer designedly dropped, bearing the owner's name some way in the corners, that we may see and remark and say, where'd this grass come from? Or I guess, because it's so short, or I guess the grass is itself a child, the produced babe of the vegetation. Or, another guess, I guess it is a uniform hieroglyphic. Hieroglyphics or Egyptian ideograms. They're pictures that were kind of writing. I guess it is uniform hieroglyphic. And it means, because it sprouts alike in broad zones and narrow zones, growing among black folks as among white, Canuck from Canada, Tuckahoe coming from Maryland or the South, congressman, Cuff, rough guy. I give them the same, I receive them the same, right? We all of us, no matter who we are, black or white, rich or poor, growing in broad zones or narrow zones, Southerners, Northerners, hoity-toity people and powerful people or ordinary people, we all end up dead and buried under the soil and become grass, right? So that makes them think. And next guess following from that. And now it seems to me the beautiful uncut hair of graves. So as grass grows in the cemetery, he thinks, this is hair growing, because the blades of grass the leaves of grass look like hair. They grow out of the graves. And so he's very tender towards the grass. Tenderly will I use you, curling grass. It may be you transpire from the breasts of young men. It may be if I had known them, I would have loved them. It may be you are from old people or from offspring taken soon out of their mother's laps. And here you are the mother's laps. So everybody goes underground and the grass grows from all of us, old and young, people we loved and mothers. And then these are very beautiful lines to me, that this grass is very dark to be from the white heads of old mothers, darker than the colorless beards of old men. Someone wrote me and said he was a wonderful observer. Boy, is he an observer. Old men have beards, and their beards come in, they look white, but they're not really white. They're really kind of colorless. He gets it. And then the most wonderful of these three lines, dark to come from under the faint red roofs of mouths. If you read that to yourself, you can actually feel the roof, faint red roofs of mouths. Your tongue moves around in your mouth, and you're aware of that. And the roof of the mouth is a pale red, and yet how can it turn out to be a dark green? And then he says, there they are, the grass. Oh, I perceive after all, because the grass is growing out of mouths, so many uttering tongues, and I perceive they do not come from the roofs of mouths for nothing. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about old men and mothers and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. And trust me, this is rhetorical. He's going to translate those hints right now. He says, I wish I could translate. He's going to tell us. And this poem now soars. Poetry doesn't get better than this. What do you think has become of the young and old men? What do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death, and if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and cease the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward, nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. I mean, these lines are stupendous to me. That what the grass shows is, he believes, and he read a lot of Eastern philosophy, like Hindus. He believes in the transmigration of souls. He believes that we are reborn, and we get reborn. He says the tongues of the grass tell us into new life. Nothing collapses. There's no death, right? The smallest sprout shows there is really no death, and if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and cease the moment life appeared. It's unbelievably beautiful. I'm not sure if it's true. I mean, this is me speaking, not Whitman, but nobody has ever said better than Whitman here, that things continue, that all goes onward and outward. I mean, he's reflecting the mood in the country as well. We could talk about that, but won't. This imperial sense of imperial destiny, manifest destiny, that we would expand the United States, would move ever farther westward and become larger and larger. And the self will expand, as he will tell us later in the poem. But here he says life itself is always expanding. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Just stunningly beautiful about the continuity of the life force, which continues even after we die. I suppose you can read it even if the human species should end in global warming, other life forms will take our place. Life goes on. It's a vital force, full of, vital means life, full of life. My own reading of this, after many, many years of reading it, is that there is maybe a little bit of a death wish here, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier, and maybe we can talk about that in the questions. I'm going to skip over some sections, and a lot of what we're skipping over are catalogs. A catalog is a listing of all the things that he sees and hears and smells and experiences. It's where our modern word catalog comes from. It dates back to the earliest texts of our tradition, to the Bible and to the Iliad. In the Bible, we get long genealogies of people, the catalogs of who begat who, and in the Iliad we get catalogs of which soldiers served beside and with and under Agamemnon. There are ways of in poetry of including the whole world. It's one thing to summarize the world, but one also wants in certain kinds of great epic poems to include the diversity that is the world. And he has many of those, and we're not going to read any of them. We're going to skip over to this lyric inserted in the poem, and it could be freestanding, and I read it a number of times before I noticed that the word I, which I thought didn't occur in section 11, does occur, as you'll see in the fourth stanza. And the lyric, as you can see, sets up a dichotomy between a rich woman and probably working class guys cavorting in the water, She's on the land, they're in the water. She's high up, they're low down. She's richly dressed, they're probably impoverished and or they don't make much money and their joy is swimming together. She's a woman, they're men. So there are a lot of dichotomies here in the first couple of lines. Um, and she in her imagination joins the men. The numbers are maybe freighted with significance. The lunar cycle and maybe the cycle of life in women. 28 young men bathed by the shore, 28 young men, and all so friendly. So they're friendly. That's another opposition. And she is, as we'll learn in the next line, lonesome. 28 young men and also friendly, 28 years of womanly life, and all so lonesome. So you can see the dichotomy here between this rich woman ensconced in her house and these young men out in the open air, land, water, woman, man, friendly, lonesome. She owns the fine house by the rise of the bank. She hides handsome and richly dressed aft the blinds of the window. Which of the young men does she like the best? Ah, the homeliest of them is beautiful to her. Where are you off to, lady? For this is the Whitman who is seeing this. For I see you splash in the water there, yet stay stock still in your room. Dancing and laughing along the beach came the 29th bather. The rest did not see her, but she saw them and loved them. And then this wonderful ending. The beards of the young men glistened with wet. It ran from their long hair. Little streams passed all over their bodies. An unseen hand also passed over their bodies. It descended tremblingly from their temples and their ribs. So she is caressing them in her mind as she stands richly dressed behind the window, right? But she's caressing them. She's joined in the 29th bather. The young men float on their backs, their white bellies bulge to the sun. They do not ask who seizes fast to them. They do not know who puffs and declines with pendant and bending arch. They do not think whom they souse with spray. It's that wonderful image of again, kind of sexuality. She's so hungry for them. That pendant and bending arch seems to me a kind of reference to the back and forth of sexual relations. And the end with the boys, the men in the water splashing and spitting water at each other is also it's an image of a male climax. So she's lonely and she gets her fulfillment in this way. Now, I give this to you because it's a lyric and because it's going to come up later at the end of 46, or section 46, or 44, I don't know. It's 46, yeah. But also because it probably indicates something that some of you may be curious about. Whitman wrote about all people, about old people and young people and prisoners and prostitutes and presidents, as we'll discover. But he wrote with a particular feeling for men. I think he was homoerotic. That is, he liked men better than women. Whether sexually he had come to that stage or not, I don't know, despite section 5 that we read before. But I think this is one in which someone cannot express herself and wants to be with men. Well, let's jump forward. We're going to look at just brief passages here until we get to section 24. In 16, he says, I resist anything better than my own diversity. I don't know if there could be a better phrase for the America we would like to see, some of us. He says, somebody reminded me, and I think rightly, long enough have you dreamed contemptible dreams. This is the America that we dream of, that is diverse, and we can't resist its diversity, that there are Black people and white people and men and women and people who speak English and people who speak Spanish and people who speak Vietnamese. There are people who are born here, parents born here, and their parents the same, and their parents, people who are recent immigrants. We're all in this together. And he himself feels himself to be a diverse human being. And he says, there's room for all of us, for everything that's in me. And you too. I breathe the air and leave plenty after me, and am not stuck up, and am in my place. We all have a place in this great, diverse country, society, world of ours. And I am very fond of these lines. The moth and the fish eggs are in their place, these little things. The suns I see, like our sun and the stars, and the suns I cannot see are in their place. He's kind of envisioning, now I read modern astrophysics, that there are a billion galaxies, and each of them has millions of stars, right? And so much we can't see, even with the great telescopes. Everything is okay. The palpable, that which you can touch and feel, is in its place, and the impalpable is in its place. This is the sense that the entire world is somehow right, that a kelson of the creation is love, and everything has its place. Here we are in section 19. You've already seen this line that's in red. He addresses us quite directly. For a poet, that's pretty remarkable. He says, do you guess I have some intricate purpose? Think I got something I'm trying to do? Well, I have, for the April rain has, and the mica on the side of a rock has. Do you take it I would astonish? He's going to, trust me, he's going to astonish us in a couple of minutes. The whole of sections 19 through 29 are going to be, everything is going to be sex. The world's going to be full of sex. And we're going to look at section 25 in particular. So what? That's the way it is. Does the daylight astonish? Or the early robin, red star twittering through the woods? Do I astonish more than they? This hour, I tell things in confidence. I might not tell everybody, but I will tell you. So he's going to tell things that we don't normally say. Move on to section 20. Who goes there? Hankering, gross, mystical, nude. Let's slow down for a minute. Amazing run of adjectives. I'm going to look at another run of adjectives shortly. You know, these things that he wants things, hankering, and he's very bodily, he's gross. And he took off all his clothes. In fact, he did that in section 2, which we didn't read. At the same time, there's a kind of spiritual part to him. He's mystical. Who goes there hankering, gross, mystical, nude? And a line I say to myself a lot. How is it I extract strength from the beef I eat? You know, you have bacon for breakfast, or a hamburger for dinner from Al's French fries, or this morning I had a smoothie and then I had shredded wheat. How does the food we eat become the emotions we have? How does the material good we ingest become spiritual feelings? We have no answer to that. I don't have an answer. And he asks that question, how is it I extract strength from the beef I eat? How does the bodily part of the world become what we would call thought and soul and whatever we might think of the spiritual part of the world? And then he asks these extraordinarily wonderful questions. What is a man anyway? What am I? And what are you? Hasn't got an answer for us. All I mark as my own, you shall offset it with your own, else were time lost listening to me. You remember the beginning of the poem? And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me belongs as good to you. All I mark as my own, you shall offset it with your own, else were time lost listening to me. We share these things. And then some lines which I think are not studied very much, but I have a particular fondness for. I do not snivel that snivel the world over, that months are vacuums in the ground but wallow in filth, that life is a suck in a cell and nothing remains at the end but threadbare crepe and tears. I don't say that my existence is empty. The months are vacuums and everything is kind of grubby, ground but wallow in filth. That and that people sell you a bill of goods by telling you that life is valuable, that life is a suck and sell. And at the end, all we got is, you know, funeral vestments, and nothing remains at the end but threadbare crepe and tears. And you probably should know that in the 19th century, when you went to a pharmacist, they didn't give you pills. They're what we call now compounding pharmacists. They ground stuff together and then they put them inside a paper and then folded the paper together and folded it some more and handed it to you. So when people went to the druggist, they came out with pieces of paper folded over with stuff. That's what they use for pills. Whimpering and truckling, fold with powders for invalids. I'm not an invalid. I don't need those things. Conformity goes to the fourth removed. I cock as my hat as I please, indoors or out. You remember that Carpenter's portrait. He's going to wear his hat regardless. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to say it's all full of emptiness. And then he goes on to say, shall I pray? Shall I venerate and be ceremonious? And there are parts of some of myself that are so funny, right? I have pried through the strata and analyzed to a hair and counseled with doctors and calculated close and found no sweeter fat than sticks to my own bones. He's going to say later, we'll get to this line too. Oh, there's that lot of you and all so luscious. There's so much of him is sweetness. And then, he's joking. I've done all these experiments and I'm pretty hot stuff. And then he says, because my students, when I taught this, used to think, oh, that Whitman, he's so self-absorbed. But he says, in all people I see myself, none more, and not one a barley corn less. And the good or bad I say of myself, I say of them. Go back to the beginning. And what I assume, you shall assume for every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you. We all have sweet fat sticking to our bones. In reviewing the poem, I had this all prepared, and then I thought I'd have to throw these lines in. He has a section in 22 in which he talks about all the good things in the world, and he says, I already told you, I think that section 5, which ends, and to die is different from what anyone supposed and luckier. All goes onward, nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed and luckier. I'm not sure if that's true. I think this is true. I think this is one of the great truths, and he just throws it in the poem here. What behaved well in the past or behaves well today is not such a wonder. The wonder is always and always how there can be a mean man or an infidel. I mistyped that. It's how there can be a mean man or an infidel. With all the things around us, with flowers blooming, with grass growing, with birds flying, with snow falling, with the feelings that well up inside of us, how can we be non-believers, infidels? He's not talking about God in traditional religions. How can we not believe when the world is so full of things that are quite wondrous? The wonder is always and always how there can be a mean man or an infidel. How can you be small and petty? How can you not believe when there's so much that flourishes in the world? Now I'm going to move very quickly. Section 23. He just mentions this word. I think it's worth pointing out. Endless unfolding of words of ages, and mine a world of the modern world, a word en masse. That means all of us together. For what I assume, you shall assume for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. He is, and I mentioned this before class started to some people, he is the most democratic of poets. And all over the world, people in every language, every culture have recognized in him this sense that He speaks for all the people who live in their society. He is a Democrat, small d, in a way that we can only marvel at and wonder at. And here is the center of the poem. This is the main thing I have to tell you about. This is section 24, in which he names himself. Right? So we started out with this, and remember we had this very strange thing with no name, and this long preface, and then this poem that starts out, I celebrate myself. Who is this self? Who is this I? And finally here in the very middle of the poem, he says, Walt Whitman, an American, one of the roughs, a cosmos. Right? We're going to go slowly and unpack these lines. He's American. Well, Emerson would say in The American Scholar, too long you have looked at the courtly muses of Europe. Right? Here, we ourselves, we Americans, we can make our own way and be our own selves, as can people in Kenya or in Japan or Malaysia. One of the roughs, I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm not the president. And I'm not a poet who occupies the chair of poetry at Harvard. I'm a world unto myself. Remember last time, for those of you who were in the last course, we had Elizabeth Bishop citing Blake to see the world in a grain of sand. Everything is included in me. I'm a universe unto myself. And then this next line, I just marvel at it. Disorderly, fleshy, and sensual eating, drinking, and breeding. My goodness. I mean, if you ask me to describe what a human being is, I would give you what I learned in the Boy Scouts. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, clean, brave, clean, and reverent. I mean, none of that string. I'm disorganized, disorderly, flashy, sensual, eating, drinking, and pardon the language, fucking. That's what he means by breeding. That's who I am. No sentimentalist, no standard above men and women or apart from them. And what I assume, you shall assume. No more modest than immodest. I mean, I actually run out of words sometimes with Whitman because he's so phenomenal. And these next lines are just phenomenal. Unscrew the locks from the doors, right? That's a metaphor for open things up. Let's not keep things away from each other. Let's let it all hang out. You can all enter in and see what I am. Of course, he's going to tell us in section 25 how to put, he says, encompass worlds, but never try to encompass me. He's going to retreat into a kind of silence, not tell us anymore. We're not going to do that. But he says here, unscrew the locks from the doors, and then, so there can never be a locked door, he says, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Let it all be open. Emily Dickinson says in a very famous first line, tell all the truth, but tell it slant, success in circuit lies. Not for Whitman. Let it all out there. Unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Whoever degrades another degrades me. You think I'm something wrong with me? I'm too dirty or whatever. In fact, that's what the writer Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who visited Emily Dickinson, he said, what do you think of Whitman? He said, Mr. Whitman, I hear he's kind of a dirty poet. And whatever is done or said returns at last to me, and whatever I do or say, I also return. Through me, and Ephlatus is a divine wind. So through me, he says, nature without check with original energy in section 1. He says, through me, the Ephlatus surging and surging, through me, the current and index. I speak the password primeval. What is the original word of the world? I give the sign of democracy. By God, I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms. The Latin writer Terence said a very famous phrase, nihil humanum ame alienum puto. Nothing human is or can be alien to me. I can relate to all things. It was the motto of Karl Marx. It was also the motto of Sigmund Freud. And I think that's what he's saying here. We are all one, and what I feel in myself, you feel in yourselves. About 7 or 8 years ago, someone asked me if I would give a reading to open the session of the Vermont State Legislature. I felt very honored, and this is what I read. I think it's one of the great statements. I keep saying great, but I think it's one of the great statements any human being has ever made about who we are and what we can become and who we can represent. So he's speaking of himself as a poet, and he's saying many long, dumb voices that have been dumb, as in unable to speak. And listen to who he wants to speak for. It is, to my mind, I just say, oh, Whitman, you are really something. Through me, many long, dumb voices, 1855 now, voices of the interminable generations of slaves, voices of prostitutes and of deformed persons, voices of the diseased and despairing and of thieves and dwarfs. Who among us can say this? Very few. Black people, maybe. It's okay now. Prostitutes? People who are deformed? Diseased people? Despairing people? Thieves in prison? Dwarfs? He's speaking for everybody. Voices of the cycles of preparation and accretion of everything that's prepared to come into being, and the threads that connect the stars. And I read this line and I think of astrophysics and its inquiries into dark matter and anti-gravity. He's going to be the voice of everything. And of wombs, and of the father stuff, it's the semen, and of the rights of them the others are down upon, of the trivial and flat and foolish and despised, of fog in the air and beetles rolling balls of dung. He is going to be, it's the most marvelous line in all of American poetry, I think. He's going to be the voice of the rights of them the others are down upon. If I have a wish for all of you and for myself, it's that we will all be the voice of them the others are down upon. Then he goes on, he says, through me, forbidden voices, voices of sexes and lusts, voices veiled and I remove the veil, voices indecent by me, clarified and transfigured. I do not press my finger across my mouth. And that can be read either as, shh, don't say that, it's too dirty or too, we can't say that in polite company, or it's, I'm going to keep things in, I'm not going to let them out. I do not press my finger across my mouth. I keep as delicate around the bowels as around the head and the heart. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. If you want a line to ponder, that's one. I don't know what to make of that. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. And here is a credo. The credo is from the Latin Mass. I believe in one God and Jesus, his Son, and the Holy Spirit. What he believes in are things of the body. I believe in the flesh and the appetites. Seeing, hearing, and feeling are miracles, and each part and tag of me is a miracle. Everything is miraculous. Everything about my body is miraculous. I remember when my first child was born, I found it so miraculous that all his fingernails were on the ends of his fingers. You know, that it is miraculous. And then we can see and hear and feel it just. So he believes in the flesh and the appetites. Divine am I inside, where the spirit lives, and out, where we have I don't know, arms and legs and armpits. And I make holy whatever I touch or am touched from. The scent of these armpits is aroma finer than prayer. This head more than churches or Bibles or creeds. And here I said, I think I put this in the Whitman I sent you, but I also sent it separately. This is from the preface, and it to my mind is one of the great statements of belief, pardon me, in all of human culture. And he just throws it off in this preface that hardly anybody reads. This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Not bad. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young, and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves, the pages of his book, in the open air every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. That's straight from Socrates, right? Socrates rejected everything he was taught. Examine thyself, know thyself. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem and have the greatest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body. I commend that to you. I think he has much to teach me. Maybe you much to teach me. So having said that he believes in the flesh and the appetites, he's going to tell us about his religion of the body. I believe if I worship any particular thing, it shall be the spread of my own body, translucent mold of me, that's the skin, right? It shall be you, shaded ledges and rests. I think of shoulders and collarbones and insides of elbows. Shaded ledges and rests, firm masculine coulter. Coulter is a plow. You can guess what that is. It shall be you, whatever goes, the depth, tilth of me, it shall be you, my rich blood, your milky stream, pale strippings of my life, breast that presses against other breasts, it shall be you, my brain, it shall be, and he's thinking of the internal of the brain, as we can see in dissections, your occult convolutions, and I'm going to unpack this imagery here. Root of wash, sweet flag, timorous spawn, snipe, nest of guarded duplicate eggs, it shall be you. And there's a pond snipe, and there's a guarded duplicate eggs, and there's the wild iris, both how it grows and its blossoms. And so he's thinking, obviously, in phallic terms. It shall be you, and it should even be my beard, mixed dustled hay of head and beard and brawn, it shall be you. And something astonishing happens here. He goes back to a state of, I guess, Freudian psychologists would call it, following Anna Freud, a state of undifferentiation between the self and the world. So he's been describing himself in terms of the world. Timorous pond snipe, tousled hay of head, blood of milky stream. And now all of a sudden he is describing the world, and the self is gone behind. He's talking not about himself, but about the world itself. Trickling sap of maple, fiber of manly wheat, it shall be you. Sun so generous, it shall be you. Vapors lighting and shading my face, it shall be you. You sweaty brooks and dews, it shall be you. Winds whose soft tickling genitals rub against me, it shall be you. Broad muscular veils, branches of live oak, loving lounger in my winding paths, it shall be you. Hands I have taken, face I have kissed, mortal I have ever touched, it shall be you. could have read that with even more emphasis on the "it shall be used," those parallelisms which are powerful and tie it together. And I'd call your attention to kind of very personally, he says, "Winds whose soft tickling genitals rub against me." If you go out on a late spring or early summer day and you feel the warm breezes pass you, it is like soft tickling genitals. I don't mean something pornographic here. It's like the world caresses us with its most private parts. And then he says, got too serious for a moment there, so it's kind of funny. "I dote on myself, there's that lot of me, and all so luscious." Ooh, you got good stuff, Walt. "Each moment and whatever happens thrills me with joy. I cannot tell how my ankles bend, or whence the cause of my faintest wish, nor the cause of the friendship I omit, nor the cause of the friendship I take again. To walk up my stoop is unaccountable. I pause to consider if it really be that I eat and drink is spectacle enough for the great authors and schools. The morning glory at my window satisfies me more than the metaphysics of books." As Emerson wrote, and I have this at the bottom, when he can read God directly, the hour is too precious to be wasted in other man's transcripts of their readings. He's going to experience life directly. And then he sees the sunrise. And as I said, these are very sexual passages. It turns out the entire world is suffused with sexuality, right? "To behold the daybreak, the sun is rising. The little light fades, the immense and diaphanous shadows, the shadows which were growing at the end of Emily Dickinson's When It Comes to Landscape Listens, shadows hold their breath when it goes, just like the distance on the look of death. Here the shadows are fading away in the light of day. The air tastes good to my palate, hefts," this is the mists rising, "hefts of the moving world and innocent gambol, silently rising, freshly exuding, scooting obliquely high and low." And then the sun is coming up, these first rays of the sun, and it's very different from that poem also about a sunrise that we read in the last course by Wallace Stevens, where the sun rises, it was like a new knowledge of reality. Here he says, I mean, the world is charged with desire, all this pink and red. It's like the juices of the sexuality of the world are coming out everywhere. Something I cannot see puts upward libidinous prongs, sees a bright juice suffuse heaven, the earth by the sky stayed with the daily close of their junction, the heave challenge from the east, that moment over my head, the mocking taunt, see then whether you shall be master. I'm going to skip a couple of sections to come to this is the shortest part, I think, as he divided it up. I've sung myself. Good question. Hamlet asked to be or not to be. That is the question. This is a better question. To be in any form, what is that? If nothing lay more developed, the quahog and its callous shelf, there's a quahog, it's got a big shell around it. We're enough. Mine is no callous shell. I have instant conductors all over me. Whether I pass or stop, they seize every object and lead it harmlessly through me. I merely stir, press, feel with my fingers, and am happy. To touch my person to someone else's is about as much as I can stand. He's just got instant conductors all over him. Everything stimulates him. And so he's going to, in section 28, I taught in a inner city school in Washington. I taught Washington, D.C., and I said, we'll skip section 28. It's all about sex. And the students all said, no, we want to read it. Section 28, which we won't do, you can read on your own, is all about sexual climax. And it's probably, it's probably himself, pleasuring himself. So I'm going to skip forward. He's become very passive. He's allowed himself to be an observer and let things come into him. And here is a turning point in the poem. It's a wonderful moment in the poem. he starts out these lines here at the end of section 37. The Whitman we know, who identifies with people who are diseased and prostitutes and dwarfs. He says, not a cholera patient lies at the last gasp, but I also lie at the last gasp. My face is ash-colored, my sinews gnarl. Away from me people retreat. Askers embody themselves in me, and I embodied in them. I project my hat and sit shamefaced and beg. And then I think he really slaps the table, you know. So somehow I've been stunned, stand back, give me a little time beyond my cuffed head in slumbers and dreams and gaping. I discover myself on the verge of a usual mistake. And the mistake is in these lines here that he's become a beggar and he's been ashamed. He was singing himself. Remember the beginning of the poem, I sing myself and celebrate myself. And the mistake is that he's become so passive that he has diminished the self. So now we move towards the end. We have only a few more minutes. I already told you how wonderful he is at nurturing us. Here's the picture of Walt Whitman at the beginning of Leaves of Grass, and here's a contemporaneous picture from the time of the Civil War by Matthew Brady, the great photographer. He says, I know I have had the best of time and space and that I was never measured and never will be measured. I tramp a perpetual journey. My signs are a rainproof coat and good shoes and a staff cut from the woods. That's how you can know me. I wear traveler's clothes. No friend of mine takes his ease in my chair. I have no chair, nor church, nor philosophy. I lead no man to a dinner table or library or exchange, but each man and each woman of you I lead upon a knoll. My left hand hooks you round the waist. My right hand points to landscapes of continents and a plain public road. I want to emphasize, this is the man who's going to give us cookies and milk in a minute. He puts his arm around us and says, you can do it. Not I, not anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. It is not far, it is within reach. Perhaps you have been on it since you were born and did not know. Perhaps it is everywhere, on water and on land. Shoulder your duds and I will mine, and let us hasten forth. Wonderful cities and free nations we shall fetch as we go. If you tire, give me both burdens and rest the chuff of your hand on my hip, and in due time you shall repay the same service to me. For after we start, we never lie by again. My God, the guy's saying, rest on me. I'll buoy you up. I'll support you. I'll take care of you. I'll carry your backpack. You're asking me questions, and I hear you. And this is Emersonian self-reliance. I answer that I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. But if you're going to find out for yourself, I'm going to be your comfort. Sit a while, wait for here are biscuits to eat, and here is milk to drink. But as soon as you sleep and renew yourself in sweet clothes, I will certainly kiss you with my goodbye kiss and open the gate for egress hence. And someone wrote me about this line. This is a great, great line. Long enough have you dreamed contemptible dreams. Now I wash the gum from your eyes. You must habit yourself to the dazzle of the light and of every moment of your life. And we're going back to section 11. You can swim on your own and be with other people. Long have you timidly waited, holding a plank by the shore. Now I will you to be a bold swimmer, to jump off in the midst of the sea and rise again and nod to me and shout and laughingly dash with your hair. And then he says in section 47, I put this line in blue because he's going to contradict himself too. A section later, I teach straying from me, yet who can stray from me? I follow you, whoever you are, from the present hours. My words itch at your ears till you understand them. And these are I keep saying they're my favorite lines. I love these lines. I do not say these things for $1 to fill up the time while I wait for a boat. Yeah, I'm not just getting paid to write this, and I'm not whiling away the time. It is you talking just as much as myself. I act as the tongue of you. It was tied in your mouth, and mine it begins to be loosened. What I assume you shall assume for every animal belonging to me, its good belongs to you. I'm speaking for you. And when I say there are wonderful things in the world, there are wonderful things in the world. You can find them too. You can find out for yourself. And when I say sex isn't so bad, sex isn't so bad. So now we have 4 minutes left, and then we'll do questions. He says at the end, listener up there, Here you, what have you to confide to me? Look in my face while I snuff the sidle. Snuff is to, like snuff out a candle, the last part of evening. Talk honestly, for no one else hears you, and I stay only a minute longer. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. I had to look this up, but in Bob Dylan's last album, after he won the Nobel Prize, he has a song that goes, I contain multitudes. We're large. We contain a lot of things. And that's what he's saying. Do I contradict myself? Because he's just said, I teach straying from me. And now he says, I'm leaving. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. I can concentrate toward them that are nigh wait upon the door slab. Who has done his day's work and will soonest be through with his supper? Who wishes to walk with me? Will you speak before I am gone? Will you prove already too late? And he looks up and he sees a hawk in the sky as the evening is setting. The hawk says, and he says, why are you talking so much, hawk? The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too, like the hawk, am not a bit tamed. Remember that passage from the preface? Unconstrained. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my bark over the roofs of the world. And he looks at the clouds in the sky. The last scud of the day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to vapor and the dusk. I depart as air, and he becomes the clouds, right? I shake my white locks hair at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drifted in lacy jags. He's become a cloud, and he's gone, and he's disappearing on us. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. I will be grass under your feet. We're back to section 6. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep it encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. So this poem, which began with I celebrate myself and sing myself, ends with you. He stops waiting for us, the reader, to catch up as we wind our own way. So I've gone through this very quickly. Here's some larger structures. You don't really need that. Next class will be William Cullis Williams. So let me conclude here, and I've left some time for questions, which